Join us on Paranormal M, the channel that takes you beyond the ordinary. I just wanted to thank the long-term listeners and any new ones for checking out this video. And if you feel like helping out, hit the like button and subscribe and turn on notifications to explore the realm of the unexplained with our latest intriguing stories. We hope you're ready to question the reality that you know. Let's get started. Acoustic guitar and cologne. About a week ago, I was home alone. I went into my office closet to play guitar, mostly because I wanted to practice blindly. As I sat thinking of what to play, I heard what sounded like a door slamming. When I opened the closet door to peek out, I found my phone sitting on the floor in front of me. I wondered how it might have fallen from a flat surface to the carpet. It sounded so loud. I shrugged it off. Looking at my phone again, I thought, maybe I should record myself playing. Followed by another thought, why bother? I'll never learn. Just then, my guitar strummed softly. My hands weren't near the strings, I'm sure. One hand rested on top and my other hand was open. The back of my hand on the neck. I think I could have moved them without realizing, but I know I disassociated. When that happens, I don't physically move. I also tried to see if I was close enough to have brushed up against the wall. I wasn't. I let it go. But tonight, as I walked past my office, I smelt cologne. It was familiar, but I couldn't place the scent right away. I know the guitar belonged to a man who passed away. His wife sold it. I'm thinking the guitar could be connected to him, but the cologne, I'm sure, was a friend who recently passed away because I gave it to him. Maybe I'm imagining things because I'm stressed out about this friend because the last time we spoke before he passed. Maybe these occurrences are all in my head. I absolutely smelled the cologne, though, and I'm sure that it reminds me of him. I've never intentionally reached out before, and I've had some pretty terrifying moments in the past with unwelcome contact, as well as some pleasant, but also uninvited. I guess I'm trying to decide whether to rationalize things or to move on, or explore why I think my house may be so susceptible to spirits. Advice is welcome. The ghost that copied my mother. While there is a pandemic, my mom still went to work. And in that time, I stayed at home. One day, my mom went to her work as always. I was playing computer games. I got a glass of water and I was in the living room. I finished my water and then I went to the kitchen to refill the water. But the thing started here. When I stand up, I heard snoring sounds from the bedroom. I was a little scared, but I think the sound came from my Xbox or PC. I controlled them, and they were silent. I went to the bedroom slowly. It was obvious that the sounds were coming from the bedroom. And when I looked to the bed, I saw a figure under the blanket. It was as if she had covered herself with a blanket and hid. For a second, I thinked if I was crazy. Or maybe some schizophrenic things. I ran to the kitchen, I grabbed a knife, and I went to the bedroom. I came next to the bed, but when I pulled the blanket, nothing came out. But after I pulled the blanket, the sound stopped. I waited for my mom like 6 hours. I never told her this story, and to this year I experienced a more terrifying event. My mom went to meet a friend. I was home alone again. I bought some chips and cola. I played video games, I watched Netflix. Everything was fine. But I fell asleep on the couch at 9 p.m. At 10 p.m. I heard some noises and woke up. I was still lying on the couch, but I wasn't sleeping. I looked at the time and it was 10 p.m. Then I heard sounds from the door to outside. I heard the sound of our door opening. I thinked that my mom came home, so I pretended to sleep. I heard her footsteps. Then she came next to me and said, "Oh, you silly, why didn't you cover yourself with a blanket?" Then she covered me with the blanket. Then she walked away from me and went to her room. I heard the footsteps again. Then I stand up and went to her room. There was no one in the room. I've never been this scared in my life. I went to my room and I fell asleep in there. At morning, I asked my mom, "When did you come home?" She said 11:30 p.m. "264-year-old farmhouse." I live in a 264-year-old New England farmhouse. I moved in almost 3 years ago. However, my husband's lived here for 20 plus years. He said there have always been bouts of activity. Things will be quiet for an extended period. Then some will kick up and then it cycles. I, of course, laughed and didn't believe my husband. When I first moved in, I thought I was going crazy from stress or mental illness or even mold as I was having full-blown hallucinations. I went through the entire process of getting a full psych eval, at least after pretty much had like a nervous breakdown. I was cleared, and I even had a professional come in to clear us for mold and other toxins. Activity ranges from footsteps when no one else is home, to moving things, to being woken up to full-body apparitions standing over our bed. My husband jokes it's just part of living in an old house. He's never been alarmed and doesn't really care about capturing any evidence. I'm over here thinking I'm going completely crazy. Any suggestions on the best way to document this sort of stuff? A few ghost hunter groups have offered to come in for free. For a fee. But it isn't really plausible at this time. Old farmhouse experiences. Odd feelings a certain time of year. Last year I moved into an old farmhouse that my husband has spent over 20 years of his life at. It was built in the 1760s. There's been an ongoing joke with the family that the house has seen a lot, in quotes, and, in quotes again, has a lot of travelers. We live in an area close to an old fort in New Hampshire. My husband and I both grew up hearing stories about the French and Indian War. My husband also grew up being told that multiple people died in the house. I was finally able to verify this with a newspaper article, but never previously actually experienced anything here. I had visited the house multiple times before moving in, and nothing really ever struck me until I visited in October. 3 years ago now. As soon as we got close to the property, I became terrified. It was just pure fear. I thought maybe it was my depression or anxiety and didn't really give it a second thought. I moved in and occasionally felt like someone was watching me, but I figured, hey, it's an old house. The weird part is, during the months of September and January, I'm full of fear and terror. Geckos. At first, I suspected a case of seasonal depression or something, but the amount of fear I feel is almost agoraphobic, which is highly unusual for me. There's a field across the street from our house, and I'm unsure of the history, but it seems most of the fear is centered around this field, and a particular tree that's located in it. Last September, my husband was also out shoveling and felt like something was watching him. Quickly realized a black figure was watching him from the tree line. He started to feel a deep sense of fear. Then it randomly just disappeared. The newspaper article I found did state that a man fell to his death in October of 1893. But I feel like it's something so much darker. Two scary tales. Thoughts? When I was around 8, my cousins and I were playing outside. Now, mind you, the house that we were at was my younger cousin's house. She lived in the middle of nowhere. The nearest neighbors were 30 minutes away. Anyways, we were playing in a bouncy house. I heard a few children laugh, but I didn't say anything because I thought I was overhearing things. My cousins then asked me to turn off the bouncy house because they thought it would be fun once it was off. I don't know, man, we were bored. So I did. That's when they started to scream at me to turn it on. Mind you, I had barely turned it off. I asked what was wrong, and they told me that they heard children screaming at them to stop. They looked scared and shooken up, so we went inside. Before going inside the house, we felt as if we were being watched. Second story. I was around 15 and my friend were throwing a sleepover for her birthday. She had 2 very protective dogs. This will be important. We went over and had fun. That's when she told us that her house was haunted and that they play this game where they'll play hide and seek in the dark. It was about 15 of us in her house. We started to tell all each other weird things that would happen. They even showed us pictures. I didn't believe her, or at least I didn't want to believe her. Once it was 3 a.m., we're all sitting down in the living room by her door. She had 2 living rooms. We were just eating snacks when the lights turned off. We had a flashlight with us because we were going to start telling scary stories. We heard someone running in the 2nd floor. We saw a shadowy figure come down the stairs. We all froze, but ignore it. The next morning we were hanging out. She went upstairs to grab a few more blankets when suddenly the atmosphere felt weird. My other friend and I look at each other, and I swear to y'all, nobody else was moving except us. My friend who went upstairs fell down the staircase. We were the only ones to react. The dogs didn't get up, and the rest of the group had their eyes on the TV. After a moment, our friends asked us why the host was on the floor, and why we looked so panicked. We told them that she fell. I had enough and went home. Once I went home, I went straight to bed, and before going to bed, I heard something running around outside of my room. I heard knocking on the floor of my room sides. My sister had a dream about me that revealed to be true. My sister lives in Ireland. I live in Australia. We get along with each other really well. We have a pretty normal sibling relationship. She's also 4 years older than me, and since I moved to Australia, I've not been able to see her a lot, twice a year at the most if I'm lucky. The first 3 months I was living in Australia, we were extremely challenged. I got accidentally pregnant. I had to get an abortion. I was feeling so panicked and ashamed I'd kept it a secret from everybody I know. That's kind of unusual for me. I hardly keep secrets from my really close friends or my sister. But in this case, I kept my pregnancy and the fact that I needed to get an abortion a total secret from everyone I know. One morning a few days before I got the abortion, I was just heading to work when my sister, who's in Ireland and I hadn't seen in 4 months, she sent me a text and just asked me, "Are you pregnant?" I was extremely shocked as this came out of absolutely nowhere. And marriage, kids, and having a family are topics we never talk about. I thought there was no point in lying to her, so I just said, "Yes, I am." She called me in a big shock. She asked me, "No way, are you serious? That's not a joke, you're really pregnant?" I confirmed the statement again. I asked how she could possibly know. We hadn't talked or called each other in a few days. To which she then answered, "I saw it in a dream. I had a dream you were pregnant and it looked so real I was so confused all day. I thought this dream was really weird." That dream disturbed me so much. My flatmate suggested I just ask you to check because why not? and she followed by saying that she just asked me but wasn't expecting it to be true at all. To this day, we are both very weirded out about the situation, wondering whether it was a coincidence, a one-time thing perhaps, or maybe my sister actually has some psychic abilities. Sister is actively haunting me. My sister Sherry and I were nearly 8 years apart. She was the eldest, of course that made me her constant tag-along. She was at the end of the boomer years. That made me Gen X and completely opposite. Never mind that she was a winter and I was a summer baby. I'm twice divorced. She was in her 27th year of marriage. She wasn't a just stay for the kids woman. She was financially strapped to my parents. She was trapped all her adult life. My mother had kicked me out after the first divorce, and after that, Cher and I had a very business type of relationship. We always stayed in touch no matter the fuss. We lost our dad to a fatal car crash in 2012. Then we lost Cher to 4 different terminal cancers on December 16th of 2020. In her last moment, she said, "Why does my birthday have to be so far away? I would have been on the 29th. She was in unimaginable pain, but wanted one last Christmas and birthday with us. Their deaths took all barriers away between my mother and I. My mother was in the TB clinic. She was there for at least 5 times in my life. Fortunately, my mother got the most powerful genes from her, so now it's my fight to stay close to her." In Irish families, seniority is everything. Now it's my turn to take the reins, as I'm the eldest child. It was several months after Cher's passing that she finally touched me. I was in the bathroom, of course. Leave it to my sister. Felt like someone was gently placing their hand on my left shoulder. I ignored it. We are a superstitious family, but sprinkled with a dash of skeptic. Then when I walked into my room, I felt like a pointed fingertip tapping on my left shoulder again. It felt like my roommate had snuck up behind me. I turned but saw no one. My anxiety was at an 11, but I said out loud, "Cher, if that's you, contact me any way you want. Just don't touch me, please." She hasn't since, but will not leave me be. Same with my niece, Ashley. She has her way of reaching out to pretty much each of us. Leave it to my sister. She's the type that would be waiting in line for heaven. Get to St. Peter, and then she would whisper, "I have some unfinished business. I'll be right back." Very soon after, the hearts would appear to my niece everywhere she went, in the clouds and the boulders and trees that she walked with Cher to many times. Then the numbers began. I blew it off several times until I couldn't move anymore. I was on workers' comp. I could care less what day it was, let alone what time it was. I began seeing 111 or 1111 on my clocks. It would be so often I stopped to listen to her. I would usually just acknowledge Cher and thank her for reaching out, that I'm looking after the family the best I could. I finally started delicately asking her daughter if it happens to her. She was in shock, of course, began sharing every moment that she could remember. Surprised yet not, she had been seeing 333 all the time. I remember her calling while we had been texting in Messenger. She felt so validated that she wasn't crazy. Cher and I have a love and hate relationship with Christmas after my niece and nephew were born. A piece of her did truly love it. I hadn't really since we moved so far our family to CT, but the first Christmas we spent at Mom's after she passed, it gave us more evidence than Ghost Adventures ever did. I'd called my niece to see when Mom wanted us there. She turned around and said, "You won't believe what I'm looking at." In a panic, I said, "Take a screenshot." The time on only the stove was 11:11 a.m. All the others were a minute later. Cher was a fantastic cook, and her kitchen was her world. We just said, "There she is, saying Merry Christmas." Then, as I was about to pull into my mom's apartment complex, my clock in the car was 1:11 p.m. Took a picture to show my niece later on. After dinner, we were all in Mom's kitchen cleaning up. My cousin, my niece, and I were honestly focused on getting the kitchen cleaned up for Mom. Then we had planned to open gifts. My cousin was facing the stove, and my niece and I were facing away from it. We had decided to talk to her about the things that Cher and I had been doing, what she's been doing to us, rather. My cousin began raising her eyebrow and interrupted us. She said, "Sorry, but you should turn around right now. Look at the stove." Of course. What time was it? It was 3:30 p.m. Yep. She hasn't stopped. It's been 4 years now, and I always know when my niece is thinking of calling me. That's when I should check on Mom. At least when something is very wrong. The time isn't all she can do. She was never tech-savvy in life. She is now, though. Anyone with a YouTube playlist will know this. It takes at least 3 steps to edit it in any way. I always watch a specific playlist of music videos before a therapy session, and whenever it was my therapy day. After a really taxing week soon after New Year's, I went to start my playlist. I named it Therapy License. The first song was one I had never added, even though it was a song that my idol sang. That was it. I always wanted to believe, but never had an experience until she passed. She continues to this day. It's been 4 years now. There was a huge ordeal between my mother and us, and how she should be buried. My niece heard her say multiple times before hospice came, she wanted her ashes spread at our beach where we grew up. Mother wanted a proper Irish burial near family, so she had a place, to visit her. We agreed, and circumstances caused a delay. My niece and I decided to let my mother have her way. She had a portion of the ashes and said we'd take her to our own hometown. Things have changed now. We'll be sort of just taking her home this summer, but we all feel Cher's not at rest and won't let go until then. I'm looking forward to giving her the peace she needs to move on. I'll miss her terribly. Something in me really believes she won't show up every now and then, and, anymore at all. Makes me feel like I'm going to be grieving her all over. Though no one in my life yet deserves to more. I really thought if I ever experienced anything paranormal, it'd make me feel like my soul is breaking. Yet, part of me is so selfish. Just wants to keep those little moments coming so I don't feel so alone. The biggest part of my heart can't wait to rent an Airbnb for June. Enough room for everyone who wants to watch us. We plan to buy a spray of Cher's favorite flowers. Take one last swim with her. Love you so much, my big sister. We'll be so happy that you can feel free to spend time with our family, as most of them are waiting for you. Peace be with you, Cher. See you when it's my time. Paranormal experience from childhood. I don't want to disclose my exact age before this story starts, but I am currently almost a young adult, and I'm describing an experience I had when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. In the neighborhood I used to live in, there was always a house at the end of the road that was completely different. I lived in London, so it was just house next to house with a tiny front yard. But this house had a long wooden fence and a wooden door. It sort of stood out. Now, one day I was riding my bike. I had just learned to ride a week ago, and I was going up and down the street. As I mentioned, I had just learned how to ride my bike, and I don't remember how exactly, but I remember falling off right next to a tree in front of this house. Nothing major, but I was off the bike and getting up off the ground. This is where it gets strange. I had fallen off right in front of the strange house I was talking about, and as soon as I was on the ground, the wooden door slowly opened. There was a man with a green face wearing all black at the door standing still. Unfortunately, the details aren't perfect as this happened a while ago, but those are the main features that I remember. Anyways, I kind of froze for a second as you do in tense situations, but then after maybe a second I instantly got up on my bike and pedaled away as fast as possible. I think something was in my closet. It used to happen to my mom all the time before I was born. I've heard all the stories, so it's somewhat familiar. The first time something ever happened, and I haven't been able to explain it, was when I was about 11. I'd woken up early-ish in the morning and I heard this bang on my closet door. It wasn't like a normal bang. It sounded like somebody'd hit my door with an open hand from the inside. I swear, I could feel the outline and sensation of that hand. My first initial thought was that somebody was hiding in there. So I went to open it. Nothing was there, so safe to say I was petrified. The day went on and I forgot about it. Until the same thing happened the next morning around the same time. I jumped that time. I went and had a look again and nothing was there. This happened consistently every morning for a while. Just became normal to me. Then I told my mom. She tried debunking it, but none of it made sense. She told me if it was something paranormal, I need to stand my ground, say that I don't like what it's doing and that this is my home. So I heard the bang and said what my mom told me to say. I can say it didn't like that a second after that. Hit my closet door way harder, followed by this massive scrape like sharp nails going all the way down my door. But after that, it stopped happening, at least so often. Then it just sort of stopped altogether. I talked to my mom telling her it stopped, and then she said while I was away, she cleaned my closet. Or cleansed. Several years later, I'm still in the same room, and I haven't heard it since. There's been other experiences, but not the same way that this has made me feel. Walmart trip turns into unexplained experience. If I had $1 for each one of those. Once a friend and I took a quick trip to Walmart. This was sometime back in 2015. We went to get a few things. We went to the self-checkout. I was wearing pocketless leggings, and this is important for later on. I had a crossbody purse. I took out my debit card to pay for our items and slid the card back into my purse, thinking that the payment went through. I then realized that for some reason it didn't go through or didn't process. I looked through my purse expecting to see my card loosely in my bag. Couldn't find it anywhere. In a panic, not wanting to hold up the line or others waiting, I paid with a different card and quickly went to my car to thoroughly search my bag for my debit card. I took everything out and looked twice. Couldn't find it anywhere. My friend and I went back to my house to go through my purse again to really make sure I looked through everything. Still, wasn't able to find it. So we drive back to Walmart and I go to customer service. I ask them to watch the cameras just in case I dropped it or somebody stole it. They looked and said they saw me put it back in my purse and that was it. We go back to my house and start looking, for what possibly could have happened. I have had other types of paranormal experiences. I thought I'd look more into this type of problem. We ended up finding something that said, to say out loud, "There are better things to get my attention. Please give back my item." So I did this. Of course, nothing happened in that moment, though the next day I was getting ready for work and put on my jeans, and right in my front pocket was my debit card. This made no sense since I hadn't worn those specific pants for a couple of days. Still to this day not sure how this happened, or what it could have been. Strange things happening with keys. I was just thinking about two strange things that have happened in my life that I still to this day don't understand. Both stories involve keys. When I was 6, I remember going to the bathroom to use the toilet. Put my hand on the keyhole to lock the door. The key was missing. And I was like, whatever, sat down on the toilet. The key did sometimes go missing when a family used it for, like, other doors in the house. But then, as I was sitting on the toilet, I randomly looked at the door. The key was in the keyhole. This freaked me out. You might think the key was there from the start, but I put my hand on the keyhole and physically felt the key missing. Saw it gone with my eyes. Then suddenly it's there. A similar thing happened last year. I'm 29, by the way. I was at work, and I was in the basement. I saw an empty apartment with 2 sets of keys in the door with 2 keyholes. I went to report this to the nurse and went back down again to retrieve the keys. When I came down, the keys were swapped for different keys. Different colors on the tags, different amount of keys on the chain. It went from 2 keychains with 10 keys on each to 2 keychains with 2 to 3 keys on them. Shadow delayed. Hey. So I just remembered this because I watched a YouTube video that reminded me after about 7 years. I was talking with my boyfriend's sister. We were just sitting on her bed. I can't remember what I was talking about, but my arms were kind of waving around as I was talking. She was just fiddling with something. She was just listening and looking at me tell her whatever it was I was telling her. My arms were casting a shadow on the wall on the other side of the room. But then I dropped my arms, and the shadow dropped a half second after my arms did. We both stopped and looked. After a couple of seconds, I said, "Did you see that?" She said, "Yeah, that delay. Yep, I saw that." So I tested my arms and their shadow. That wasn't even my shadow. The shadow my arms were casting were very light, much farther away, almost into the other room. This house was insanely old and creepy. To get into the farthest room, you had to go through the first one, and that was an only access. But it had a, regular closed closet-shaped closet, so I don't think that was supposed to be an office, but who knows. Anyway, I started kind of freaking out. I was so spooked. She said to just ignore it and finish whatever I was talking about. I tried, but ultimately I couldn't shake the intense fear from that experience. I left 5 minutes after it happened. I still can't understand. How could she not have been scared? And I'm not even easily scared, but that was crazy. I felt very intensely like something was watching me through the door after that. Thought it was very odd how specific that feeling was. Specifically through the door. What a weird first reaction. Well, about a door that was unrelated to the whole thing, you know what I mean? I don't know, it scared the shit out of me. The same girl had given me a kind of oracle reading with a regular playing card. It was incredibly detailed and accurate on what actually did unfold in life afterwards. This girl was scary without trying to be, elegant, somewhat old-fashioned, graceful, beautiful, and cool, and something was very different about her. Scary. I'm not sure what to make of the whole situation, but I feel like she was accustomed to whatever that was, and I definitely was not. I broke up with her boyfriend soon after. Well, actually, he just cheated a lot and didn't really come around as much, so I think I'm the one who got broken up with, to be honest. Saw a little boy in my mirror. This happened a little over 10 years ago, but the memory is still very vivid. My parents had just rented a new house for us. My sister and I were splitting the basement. I had my full-sized mirror placed against the back wall at the time. so by looking in it you could see the open doorway that led to the stairs. They were just around the corner of the doorway, so you couldn't actually see the stairs, though. Anyway, my sister also had a big wardrobe that she kept her TV on and clothes in, which wasn't lying flat against the other wall. It came out at like an angle, had its back toward the stairs, basically. So I was doing my makeup one day, not too long after moving in. I looked down to grab something. When I looked back up, there was a little boy crouched down in the corner behind my sister's wardrobe. I never got to see his face, but he was wearing a yellow shirt with red shorts and black shoes. As soon as I caught sight of him, even though he didn't see me, or at least see me see him, he got up and shot straight out of the doorway. I assume up the stairs afterwards. Of course, I got up as quick as I could and tried to chase after him, but he was just gone. There was no sound from him, no heavy footsteps that should have been there the way he was sprinting. And there's nowhere that he could have hidden. The underneath of the stairs was open since we had just moved in. I could see every inch of it. I don't know who that boy was. I tried to research the house to see if there were any stories about it or a little boy in the area, but couldn't find anything. All I know is that after I looked for him, I felt nothing but sadness following him. The whole area I grew up in was known for shootings and illegal activities and such. So maybe he was a victim of something like that. I don't know. Just an experience that stuck with me ever since. Man in White, My Sleep Paralysis Nightmare, and My Brother's Bizarre Encounter. When I moved into an old apartment with my brother and a friend from school, in one of the first weeks there, I had a terrifying episode of sleep paralysis. It's not something that happens often to me, maybe a few times before, but this particular incident was by far the scariest. Picture this. My room had a queen-sized bed right in the middle. To the right, there was a huge built-in wardrobe covering the entire wall. The door that led to the hallway, too. To the left, there was a window that I usually left open at night because I enjoy waking up to the morning sun. I mention all of this to set the scene. During this episode, I was sleeping on my side. I was facing the open window. The night was clear and the moonlight streamed in. The moment I opened my eyes, I felt this overwhelming sense of being trapped. And there it was, right in front of me, hovering and looking down. A man, tall and completely dressed in white, complete with a wide-brimmed hat that caught my attention. I couldn't see his face. It was obscured in shadows. He wore a white dress jacket, shirt, gloves, and that distinctive hat. Initially, he didn't move or say anything, just floating there, staring at the floor of my room, too. Then suddenly he started rapidly listing animated movies. It might sound bizarre, but it freaked me out. Couldn't wake up and I was seeing him clearly in my room. The Little Mermaid, Snow White, Mulan, The Little Mermaid, Snow White, Mulan, repeating without a pause. That was until he sharply turned his head and locked eyes with me. That's when I screamed with all my might to wake up my brother. I actually managed to move and I turned on the light, heart racing and almost in tears. I hesitated to tell my brother or roommate initially. I was kind of feeling embarrassed, and I didn't want to scare them. However, 2 days later while chatting after dinner, I spilled the beans. My brother's reaction left us both completely spooked. Fast forward to 6 months ago, during the summer. That's when my brother had a bizarre encounter. We live in an area with lots of trees, minimal nighttime activity, and dim lighting. As he was driving home calmly, about 30 seconds from our house, he saw a man at the stop sign, tall and dressed entirely in white with a broad-brimmed hat. It seemed odd, like he'd come from a costume party. What freaked him out was that as he approached the stop sign, The man raised his hand, signaling him to stop. Despite being in a car, my brother felt a chill and intense fear, accelerating and parking at home while nervously looking back, afraid the man might follow him. He kept this to himself, thinking it might be a crazy person or his imagination. It wasn't until I described the man that he revealed seeing him months earlier in our town. Searched online, but it seems like no one else has encountered him. An experience that has stuck with me for years. When I and my best friend were in Boy Scouts, we'd go camping twice a year. Like many Canadians, our group headed up north for this biannual wilderness sabbatical. This campsite was incredibly rural. It was on an Algonquin indigenous land, and it was surrounded by a dense forest. Whenever night fell, I'd always just get creeped out. It was so dark and silent. On the final day of one of the camping trips, we decided to light up a campfire. We wanted to make some s'mores. My friend and a few other older scouts and I were instructed to head into the woods and collect things to fuel our fire. Things like dry tree bark, dead leaves and whatnot. I was gonna say dried. Once we had collected an ample amount of things off the ground, we got distracted and started dicking around. We were running about and throwing pine cones at each other. I managed to duck behind this massive boulder. I was going to wait out the ensuing tomfoolery. After a few minutes of silence, I assumed the coast was clear. I could return to the campfire. Right after I got up, I heard rustling on the opposite side of the boulder I was hiding behind. Mind you, this boulder was huge, and it was already somewhat late. I couldn't tell who or what was on the other side. I heard a raspy imitation of a friend's voice whisper the words, "I see you." Immediately, I thought it was my friend tricking me so he could pelt me with pine cones and other debris. I exclaimed, "I'm not stupid, I know it's you." There was no response. Suddenly, I hear my friend calling my name. I turn and look up to see his silhouette near the campfire, and he yelled, "Who are you talking to?" In that moment, I realized everybody had left the woods and had returned to the campsite. I was alone. My stomach sank. I bolted back to safety. To this day, I have no idea who or what was speaking to me, and who or what was lurking on the other side of that boulder. I've told this story and nobody believes me. Recently, me and that same friend were on a Discord call. I was sharing my screen and we were having a nostalgia trip on Google Maps. We were revisiting our elementary school and various other places. I decided to look up our campground, only to find out it's been indefinitely closed. I wonder if my experience and the campground's sudden closure are correlated. Who knows? Have any of you seen what I call shadow walkers? I've had some experiences in my early childhood that I'd like some clarity on. I grew up in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. It was in the mid-2000s. I lived in a little house on the top of a mountain with no neighbors. And this is important context-wise. I spent most of my time outside playing in the forest, which was my backyard. Some of my earliest memories involve seeing what many people call shadow people, although these were only outside and they were never aggressive. They would walk in behind trees and would disappear to maybe materialize, but they never would just appear. They would only emerge or disappear behind trees. I began to bring them little things like jacks and bouncy balls or acorns because I thought they were my friends. After I began doing this, they began to appear more frequently, and they would even come closer to me. They wouldn't ever get closer than roughly 15 feet away. When they did, we would have what I used to call dance parties. Any movement I would make, they would directly copy. If I waved, they waved. If I jumped, they jumped. I would just run around and dance, and they would also dance. I never felt a danger with these entities either. I always got either a very neutral or warm feeling around them. This is why I'm confused. Whenever I Google shadow people, they're always mentioning dark feelings and experiences that, well, it's not the case for me. I should also mention that physically these creatures were just human-like silhouettes, both male and female looking. They were roughly average height, but probably a little smaller since they were close to my height as a child. What matters far more than the claim is the evidence for the claim. And when I say research, I don't just mean hanging out in an abandoned building trying to talk to ghosts using a Ouija board. Not to say that there's no value in doing that, but anecdotal experience is trumped by empirical data. And so I spent as much time as possible reading research papers and contacting scientists who were doing the work. Contrary to popular opinion, there are scientists that are studying this phenomenon, and there are actually a lot of data out there too, although there's no consensus on the nature of the phenomenon itself. One of the people I spoke with just this past week is Dr. Jim Segala. They'd been working with Dr. Colm Kelleher and Dr. Kit Green to study the so-called experiencers. People who have a history of experience with anomalous or paranormal phenomenon. Some of those names will be familiar to people who are versed in the subject of UFOs and the government's complicated history with that subject. Dr. Segala's team deployed custom-built devices. These devices were meant to collect environmental measurements, ranging from temperature and humidity to acceleration and gravitational readings, even gamma radiation. That last one is particularly interesting because there are very few things in the natural environment that produce ionizing radiation, and really nothing that should be producing the kind of spikes that we were measuring across multiple devices. The kind of experiences that subjects were reporting include poltergeist phenomenon, shadow beings, orbs, and even cryptids. Things that are routinely dismissed on the subreddit as fantasy or hallucination. But these subjects weren't crazy. Some of these people have high standing in the intelligence and military communities, and some who hold active security clearances. And these clearances require frequent psychological assessments. More importantly, these events correlated with anomalous readings on the devices. It indicated that there was genuine physical phenomenon occurring, although much of that phenomenon has proved to be extremely difficult to document. The theories on why it's been so hard to capture range from consciousness-based explanations to interdimensional non-human intelligence. Intelligence which may have the ability to operate outside of time, and even to read our thoughts. These things are currently being discussed in classified briefings with members of Congress. I'll be surprised if you had telepathic interdimensional werewolves on your 2024 bingo card. But here we are. Allow me to make a quote from Marcello Truzzi, one of the founders of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, the leading organization for professional skeptics. In science, the burden of proof falls upon the claimant, and the more extraordinary a claim, the heavier is the burden of proof demanded. The true skeptic takes an agnostic position, one that says the claim is not proved rather than disproved. He asserts that the claimant has not borne the burden of proof, and that science must continue to build its cognitive map of reality without incorporating the extraordinary claim as a new fact. Since the true skeptic does not assert a claim, he has no burden to prove anything. He just goes on using the established theories of conventional science. But if a critic asserts that there is evidence for disproof, that he has a negative hypothesis saying, for instance, that a seeming psi result was actually due to an artifact, he is making a claim, and therefore also has to bear a burden of proof. Possible mimic. There have been two happenings in the past week or two. The first time I went outside to call our cat in, and then two of my brothers locked the door as a joke. I started pretending to be our cat, meowing and scratching at the door. We were laughing. I could hear them laughing through the door. Then I heard a meow. We had let the cat in. She ran in, then my brothers closed the door. It was from the edge of the darkness. I know it was not a cat. It was someone or something mimicking my meow. 3 of our neighbors moved out, so 3 houses were empty. They have been for months, and our other neighbors were out or asleep and no one was walking past. Second time, this one isn't as creepy. My mom had gone out, so we were watching the house. I was playing games with my brother and I heard a knock at the door. I yelled for my younger sibling to open the door and let my mom in. The kids don't respond, so I went to do it, and the door, and the wooden door, was open. The screen door was closed, but it was unlocked. None of the kids had seen Mom at the door. It happened about 5 minutes later, except there's a voice that said, "Yoo-hoo," at me. Maybe not like that. It was through the window, so I checked it. I was also ready right next to it, and no one was there. I heard it clear as day, and there was nowhere to hide. I was looking through the window in 1 second. Plus, my mom actually came home 5 to 10 minutes later. Sorry if I woke anyone up with my overly enthusiastic yoo-hoo. Don't know where that came from. Do we have a ghost? My whole life, female 20, I feel as though I've been able to pick up on paranormal things. I assume people on here especially will understand what I mean. But occasionally, I can feel an energy in a room, like a presence or like the room is holding a feeling. Hard to explain. I moved into a new house with some friends in September. The top room in our house has such an odd, intense energy feeling. Occasionally, I'll just kind of make a walk and start talking to my friend because I think she's in there. I usually have such a strong sense there's another person in the room with me. Except this time only to look around the corner and I find that I'm alone. Over the Christmas break, we came back and found all my plants had been hanging on the wall in that room. They were laying on the floor. Soil on the ceiling, even though the plants were hung low down. Nowhere else. Hardly any on the floor at all, and none on the wall or on the desk underneath. Sometimes you can hear like a heavy breathing in your ear when you're sitting in that room. And that's with no one next to you or behind you. My friend who sleeps in there and my friend in the room below consistently wake up with tiny 1 centimeter, almost perfect circle bruises all over their bodies. Interdimensional entities. So I grew up in a UK town that's always had a rep as a bit woo-woo hippie-ish. Many years ago, I went to my GP about foot pain. She recommended a local podiatrist. I lived around the corner from a foot clinic. I'd walked past this single street-fronted shop door that led down to a basement for years. Anyways, I made an appointment and went to see the lady who was recommended. I went in, did a foot bath, was asked to sit myself on a therapy table. After discounting my query as to whether I might be flat-footed, she then began what would become a reflexology session. This began by waving crystals over me. Growing up where I didn't think too much of anything, to be honest. I was just mildly amused. She began massaging my foot and clicking her body in ways that reflected my own tics, without possibly being able to know about them in a short period that we had met. Neither of us mentioned this, despite some of the joint clicks that she was manifesting being actually quite loud. We discussed very little. However, I think as we were finishing up, she said something like, "Your pelvis is possessed by entities from another dimension." I was 19 at the time, and none of this was in my vocabulary or on my radar. I think I thanked her politely. She gave me some flower oils for my aura, and I left. Or I should say I danced out of there. I felt amazing. So it got a bit stranger. Not too long after that, I was walking home passing the foot clinic. That's when I saw this lady climbing into an ambulance. I forgot to mention she was pregnant, and I assumed it was something to do with that. Sometime later, this foot clinic, which had sat there for years, was closed. Can't remember too many details, but I'm sure for the reflexology alone, I went looking for this lady again. I could find no details concerning the previous clinic, nor could I find her in any national professional register. It's just like after years of just being there, I go for a treatment, and then pop, the whole setup just disappeared. It's as if it never was there. Of course, it was all legit. My GP recommended her by name. Just felt very odd. You should ask your GP again. Too much of a coincidence. So about 2 years ago, my mother fell out of the back of a mobile dog grooming van. She broke her kneecap and other parts of the knee hinge. She needed surgery now. My mom isn't unhealthy, but she's a little underweight and in her, mid-60s. This was the first time, I was born, that my mother's having some type of decently major surgery. I had trust issues in doctors and surgery from previous experiences. A hospital in Chicago let my grandmother lay in the operating table and bleed to death after routine gallbladder removal. So you could understand, I was quite nervous. The doctors told us the surgery would be a 3-hour operation tops. Once the 7th hour of surgery with no update, I Googled Baptist churches in my state. Me and my family just moved to the area. I called 3 before one finally answered. No, I'm not a huge religious person, but I believe in at least some type of higher power, due to small things like this situation. When I called the last church, the preacher picked up the phone. I asked him to pray with me for my mother, that I was very nervous since we hadn't gotten any word done. At least, in more than double the predicted time. The preacher began to pray over the phone, asking God to help get my mother through surgery quickly and healthily. He finishes the prayer, and we both say amen. As crazy as this sounds, literally not within 3 seconds of both of us saying amen, the second line on the house phone rang through wires. And the nurse told me that my mother had made it through the surgery, and it was she's in the rest wing, ready to be picked up whenever I was ready. Now, code all my math heads. What are the 1 in a chance that this would have happened without divine intervention? Prison fire alarm puller. I'll tell it, and you guys tell me what you think. Okay, so when I was young, I didn't have much self-control. I would get into a lot of fights and would end up doing jail time for it. Well, one time I was in a really old MD County jail for an 18-month stretch. I'd become a trustee, otherwise known as an inmate trusted to move around the jail and have a job inside the jail. I was on overnight kitchen cleanup. Now, there's not really much to do on this job because the inmates who make the food already clean up after themselves pretty damn well. Well, it was me and a fellow inmate. The shift was always from midnight until 5 a.m. So anyways, the kitchen lady always told us about some guy who killed himself there in the 80s. And after that, the hoses and stuff would always go off on their own. I, of course, was a skeptic. And I thought total bullshit. So one night or morning, I was in the kitchen with the other inmate. He was in the bathroom napping because, like I said, there's literally nothing to do on this job. I was in the main kitchen area getting myself a cup of coffee. The thought of this ghost came up for some reason, and by myself I decided to start taunting this ghost. "You're not real. You're a weak-ass bitch ghost. If you're real, you'd be able to show yourself." And once I started doing that, the radio started going in and out. Then I swear every one of the powdered fire extinguishers that sat over the flat-top grills all went off at once. They spewed powder every fucking spot. Scared me shitless. I took off running. They had a fire investigator come in and said that somebody had to physically pull the lever to make that happen. I know for a fact that where I was nowhere near the lever. The other inmate was in the bathroom. I would have had to have him come out if he left that bathroom as for an officer, and the doors had a loud buzzing noise when they opened. You would hear that. There was none. Something pulled that alarm. I felt my great-grandmother pass away. I'm from Brazil, which is a traditionally Catholic country, but with significant influence from African religions. But I'm not a particularly religious person, nor do I tend to believe in the supernatural. But my great-grandmother was an adept of spiritism and a sort of religious leader within my community until recently. She was too old to practice now, and time had taken some of her wisdom away. I was lucky enough to have her around for the entirety of my childhood and most of my teenage years. She unfortunately passed away last December, under less than ideal circumstances, and with considerable discomfort. Despite her old age, she was very independent, insisted that she didn't need help to move around. She had never had any incidents until she tripped on her way to the bathroom and broke her left arm. The bones of old people have a certain tendency to shatter rather than break, actually. This triggered a series of medical incidents that eventually claimed her life. Not only did her arm break, but she apparently had internal bleeding, had an infection, suffered a stroke in the hospital as well. Not only that, but she was too old to undergo surgery under those conditions. The surgeons we approached were reluctant to risk the procedure despite the high pay. The moment she passed away, I was reading on the couch when I was struck by a certain sensation in my chest. I cannot hope to accurately translate this into words. It felt as though my heart had skipped a beat out of shock. My lungs had been filled with fresh air after a moment of asphyxiation. The sensation couldn't have lasted more than 5 seconds. Though after it was over, I was left with what I could only describe as being a mix of restlessness but simultaneous relief. Relief from all of my concerns that seemed to plague me at the time. Then melancholy. Minutes later, I got a call from my crying aunt. I learned that my great-grandmother had passed away. I then had to inform my father by myself. For context, she was the one who raised my father, so my grandparents were divorced. My grandmother didn't have the means to. I swear I saw her. When I was around 10 years old, I was alone in a part of the schoolyard during the morning break. In the country I lived in, it was like common for schools to have 2 breaks, a 30 and a 45-minute long one in the morning, and a 1-hour long one at lunchtime. There was a tall, huge tree there. I was sitting on one of the large roots that stuck out of the ground. That's when I heard someone approaching. I turned to see who it was. I saw it was one of my friends. She said, "Bet you can't catch me." I told her I could do it. We started running around the tree while I tried to reach her and catch her. We were both laughing. She was right. She was too fast for me to reach her. Then one of my classmates called my name. I stopped running and turned around, and the boy who called my name asked, "What are you doing running around the tree by yourself?" I was about to tell him I wasn't alone when I saw that my friend, who I thought was there with me just a few seconds ago, wasn't there. It was really strange. I just told the boy it wasn't important and I felt like doing it. Later that day, I saw my friend. She came and said, "How have you been?" It was like she hadn't seen me that day. I didn't say anything about it or what happened earlier, but while we were talking, she mentioned that she had spent the break in her classroom. She was talking with some of her friends, and it was true, asked one of the friends later. This made me think I was crazy or something. It was impossible that she could be in two places at the same time. Several years have passed since that day. Still can't find an explanation for what happened. And I've never told anybody about it. I don't know if it was something supernatural, a glitch in the Matrix, or if I just imagined it. But what I do know is that I saw her. My two friends and I possibly saw a ghost train. So this was about 6 years ago, January, I believe. I was with two lifelong friends. We decided to go do something before we all shipped off to the military. I was going to be the first to ship out a few months after this. We started off hanging out at one friend's grandma's house. We eventually got bored and drove down to this river kind of back in the mountains. So the way this is set up, we had the road up the hill, then a small patch of woods to walk through, probably 20 meters of woods. Then it opened up to a railroad track. Below the railroad track, down a steep gravel hill, was a riverbank. It was dark. We parked the car on the road and walked down the river, crossing the road. We didn't really have a plan. We just built a small fire on the riverbank and sat around repeating inside jokes and laughing about dumb stuff we did when we were younger. We couldn't have been there longer than 15 minutes when we heard a man yelling. Though we couldn't make out any words, the yelling sounded like he was yelling in a defensive manner. We looked around and couldn't see anything. We heard it again and decided to stomp out the fire and sit there quietly and listen. After a few minutes go by, we decided to leave. We made our way up to the steep. So steep we basically had to crawl up it. So steep gravel hill to the railroad tracks. We got to the top where we were about to cross the tracks, but we heard the sound of an engine getting closer. We decided to get on our bellies and kind of wait the train out. We didn't want to get caught on the railroad property because it's a no trespass area. Anyways, we seen lights coming and even seen smoke coming from the engine. Weird since they didn't use steam engines anymore. We thought nothing of it and kept waiting. We waited for maybe 30 seconds to a minute when we heard the same noise from earlier. We looked around again and seen nothing. When we turned back, the train was no longer headed toward us. It was just gone. We seen that it was clear. We just crossed the tracks, went back up the hill through the woods and just slept in the car. We ended up leaving in the morning and never really thought much of it. Then the next evening, we finally brought up how weird it was that a whole entire train just disappeared. We questioned why we didn't just leave. Fast forward to it 2 to 3 years later. I was in the military at this point. I was back home in West Virginia for leave. I went to a bookstore with my dad and brother and I went to the horror section. I seen a subsection with local books. I picked up one that was called something along the lines of West Virginia Legends. I don't know the exact title, so pretend it's that. I flipped past a few pages and landed on one section. It was called Ghost Trains in West Virginia. I immediately closed the book and sat it down. Weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. We still talk about it to this day, too. And I really don't know why we thought nothing of it until the next day. It was extremely weird. Also note that the way this particular track was set up, the way it ran was parallel to the river, and the road going around the mountain. There was no fork in the tracks, and it couldn't have turned anywhere due to being right in between a road, a mountain, and a river. An abrupt end and an abrupt departure. See ya.